The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of figs and incense, a heavy sweetness that could not mask the metallic tang of destiny fulfilled. Outside, the Egyptian sun beat down upon the walls of Alexandria, but within the stone confines of the mausoleum, a chilling silence reigned. The Roman soldiers, sent by their master Octavian, finally breached the doors. They had expected resistance, defiance, perhaps the final, fiery speech of a cornered queen. Instead, they found a tableau of serene, eternal stillness. There, upon a golden couch, lay Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, dressed in her full royal regalia. She looked not like a defeated enemy, but like a goddess asleep. Her face was calm, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips, as if she held one final secret the world would never possess. Beside her, slumped at her feet, were her two most loyal handmaidens, Iris and Charmian. One lay dying as the soldiers entered. The other, with her last ounce of strength, was carefully adjusting the diadem on her queen's head, ensuring that even in death, royalty would not be askew. But it was not the sight of the deceased queen that seized the soldiers with a profound and unnerving sense of mystery. It was what they could not see. There was no struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood, and most unnervingly, no sign of the serpent. The official story, the one that would be carved into the annals of Roman history, was that she had taken her own life with the bite of an asp, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. Yet the room held no such creature. The guards searched frantically, overturning baskets, peering into the deep shadows of the chamber. They found nothing. No snake, no trail, no evidence of its deadly visit. All they found upon the queen's pale skin, upon closer inspection, were two faint, almost imperceptible pricks on her arm, tiny marks, too subtle for the venomous strike of a great Egyptian cobra. They were the only clues left behind, the silent, ambiguous testaments to the final moments of a legend. In that moment, a question was born, a question that would echo through 2,000 years of history, haunting scholars, archaeologists, and dreamers alike. How can the most famous woman in the world, a queen whose name is synonymous with power, intellect, and love, simply vanish? Not just her life, but her body, her tomb, her final resting place erased from the map of human knowledge as if she were a mere phantom. Her palaces have crumbled. Her great city of Alexandria lies beneath the waves and modern streets, and her body, the physical vessel of that indomitable spirit, has never been found. It remains the greatest vanishing act in history, a cold case 2 millennia old. This question, this profound and unsettling mystery, is not just a historical footnote, it is an obsession. It speaks to the fragility of legacy and the immense power of those who write the history books. It is the kind of mystery we were born to explore here together, a puzzle that invites us to look beyond the accepted narrative and into the shadows of what might have been. Hello, and welcome. I am Mr. H, and this is Mystery History for Sleep. If you believe, as I do, that history is the greatest mystery of all, then I invite you to become a part of our expedition. Subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell so that you never miss a chapter in our shared quest for the truth. Your presence here makes this journey possible. Now, let us return to that silent, sun-drenched room in Alexandria, where our story, and Cleopatra's, reaches its enigmatic end, and yet, in another sense, has only just begun. The verdict of history was written that day, penned by the hand of her conqueror, Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus of Rome, and the verdict was simple: suicide. A tragic, yet noble end for a proud queen who refused to be paraded in chains through the streets of Rome. It was a perfect story, a neat and tidy conclusion to a messy and bloody war. It painted Cleopatra as a dramatic, emotional woman, driven by passion and grief over the death of her beloved Mark Antony. It painted Octavian as a merciful, if stern, victor who had intended to spare her but was foiled by her feminine pride. It was a masterpiece of political propaganda, and for 2,000 years, the world has largely accepted it. But let us for a moment step into the role of the detective. Let us examine the evidence, not with the eyes of a Roman senator, but with the cold, hard lens of logic and modern knowledge. The weapon of choice, the asp, is in itself a deeply flawed protagonist in this drama. The term asp in ancient texts typically referred to the Egyptian cobra, a large and formidable serpent. Its venom is a potent neurotoxin, certainly lethal. However, its bite is not the swift, painless passport to the afterlife that the story suggests. Death by cobra venom can be a horrifying, agonizing process, involving convulsions, paralysis, and respiratory failure, a process that can take hours. It is anything but a clean or dignified exit. Was this truly the method a queen obsessed with her image and legacy would choose? A queen who, according to ancient writers, was an expert in toxicology and had spent years studying poisons to find the most painless and rapid methods of death. Furthermore, there is the logistical improbability of the entire scenario. The mausoleum was heavily guarded by Roman soldiers. Octavian was desperate to capture Cleopatra alive. She was to be the living, breathing centerpiece of his triumphal parade in Rome, the ultimate symbol of his victory over the decadent East and his rival, Mark Antony. The security around her would have been absolute. The idea that a large, aggressive cobra could be smuggled past these elite guards, concealed in a simple basket of figs, stretches credulity to its breaking point. And what of her two handmaidens? Did the very same snake, after delivering its fatal bite to the queen, then proceed to bite both of her attendants in quick succession? The behavior of the creature would be highly unusual. It is far more likely that a cobra, having struck once, would have become defensive and agitated, making it nearly impossible to handle for a second and third attack. The entire narrative, when placed under scrutiny, begins to feel less like a historical account and more like a carefully constructed play, a piece of theatre designed for a Roman audience. So, if not suicide by snake, then what? Let us consider the alternative, the theory that whispers in the margins of history books, the one that Rome had every reason to suppress. Let us consider the possibility of assassination. The motive is as clear as the Egyptian sky. Cleopatra was not merely a defeated queen, she was the single greatest threat to Octavian's absolute power. She was intelligent, charismatic, and immensely wealthy. But more dangerous than all of that, she was the mother of a boy named Caesarion, Ptolemy the 15th Caesarion, the biological son of Julius Caesar himself. As long as Caesarion lived, he represented a legitimate and arguably more direct heir to Caesar's legacy than Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son. For Octavian, the complete consolidation of power required not just the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra, but the permanent erasure of their entire bloodline. A living Cleopatra could have become a rallying point for dissent in the eastern provinces. A living Caesarion could one day challenge his rule in Rome itself. The stakes were absolute. With such a powerful motive, the means become a secondary consideration. The two small pricks found on Cleopatra's arm are far more consistent with the prick of a poisoned needle or a pin dipped in a potent toxin than the bite of a large snake. A fast-acting poison, perhaps derived from a plant like hemlock or wolfsbane, or a complex compound known only to expert toxicologists, could have been administered by a trusted servant or an agent of Octavian who had infiltrated her inner circle. Such a method would be silent, swift, and easily concealed. It would leave behind minimal evidence, just the faint marks that the Roman soldiers discovered. The deaths of her handmaidens in this scenario ceased to be a strange coincidence. They were witnesses who had to be silenced, their deaths part of the same cold, calculated plot. The official story of suicide served Octavian's purposes perfectly. It absolved him of the dishonor of executing a queen, a mother, and a former ally of Rome. It transformed his political rival into a tragic heroine, her death a matter of passion, not politics. He could publicly mourn her passing and offer her a lavish funeral, all while ensuring that her threat to his power was permanently neutralized. He did, in fact, hunt down and execute Caesarion shortly after Cleopatra's death, proving that his goal was the complete annihilation of his rivals. The verdict of history, it seems, was written by the victor to serve the victor's agenda. This brings us to the second, and perhaps even more profound, layer of our mystery, the lost tomb. If we accept the Roman account that Octavian, in a show of magnanimity, allowed Cleopatra to be buried with honor alongside her beloved Mark Antony, then we are faced with an incredible archaeological paradox. The tomb of Antony and Cleopatra would have been one of the most significant structures in Alexandria, the final resting place of the last pharaoh and her Roman consort, filled with the legendary treasures of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It would have been a landmark, a site of pilgrimage, and a monument known throughout the ancient world. And yet, it has completely vanished. For centuries, archaeologists and treasure hunters have scoured the land and sea around Alexandria. They have found palaces, temples, and sunken cities. But of this grand mausoleum, there is not a single, undisputed trace, not a foundation stone, not a broken pillar, not one inscription that says, "Here lie the great queen and her general." How is this possible? Did an earthquake or a tsunami, common in this region, swallow it whole, hiding it forever beneath the Mediterranean waves or the silt of the Nile Delta? This is a plausible explanation, and many believe the tomb lies somewhere in the submerged sections of the ancient city. But another, more tantalizing theory has emerged in recent years, championed by the tireless efforts of one remarkable archaeologist. Her name is Dr. Kathleen Martinez, a former criminal lawyer from the Dominican Republic, who became so consumed by the mystery of Cleopatra's tomb that she switched careers, retrained as an archaeologist, and dedicated her life to finding it. For nearly 2 decades, she has been leading an excavation not in Alexandria, but at a site nearly 30 miles to the west, a place called Taposiris Magna. Dr. Martinez's theory began not with a shovel, but with a simple, powerful idea. She believed that everyone was looking in the right city, but for the wrong kind of tomb. Cleopatra was not just a queen. She was a scholar, a theologian, and a master of symbolism. She was the living embodiment of the goddess Isis, the divine mother and wife of the god Osiris, who was the lord of the underworld. Her partner, Mark Antony, had long identified himself with the god Dionysus, who in the Egyptian pantheon was closely associated with Osiris. Martinez reasoned that Cleopatra would not choose a simple burial plot in the royal quarter. She would choose a place of immense religious significance, a place where she could enact her final, divine ritual and ensure her eternal life with Antony, just as Isis had resurrected her husband Osiris. Taposiris Magna was the perfect candidate. Its name literally means Great Tomb of Osiris. It was one of the most important religious centers in Egypt, dedicated to the cult of Osiris. It was a sprawling complex of temples and sacred ground, a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was believed to be thin. It was here, Martinez theorized, that Cleopatra would have orchestrated her own sacred burial, transforming her death from a political defeat into a religious apotheosis. Armed with this theory, Dr. Martinez and her team began to excavate. What they have uncovered is nothing short of extraordinary. They have unearthed a vast temple complex dedicated to Isis. They have found a cemetery of high-status Greco-Roman mummies, some with golden tongues placed in their mouths, an ancient ritual meant to allow the deceased to speak to Osiris in the afterlife. They have discovered dozens of coins minted during Cleopatra's reign, bearing her image, and the alabaster head of a statue that is believed to depict the queen herself. They have found evidence that places both Cleopatra and Mark Antony directly at this site. But the most breathtaking discovery lies beneath the temple itself. There, cut deep into the bedrock, Martinez's team discovered a vast and complex network of underground tunnels. One tunnel, an incredible feat of ancient engineering, stretches for nearly a mile beneath the earth. It is a place of profound mystery and danger. For thousands of years, seismic activity and the ingress of water have made these tunnels unstable. The work is slow, perilous, and painstaking. Each foot of progress is a battle against time and the crushing weight of the earth. Martinez and her team have waded through flooded chambers and navigated collapsed passages, driven by the conviction that they are on the right path. They believe that somewhere within this subterranean labyrinth, perhaps in a sealed chamber yet to be discovered, lies the untouched tomb of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. They are searching for a hidden entrance, a false wall, a secret shaft that has kept its treasure safe from grave robbers and the ravages of time for 2 millennia. The work continues to this day. Each new season of excavation brings with it the palpable hope that this will be the year the mystery is finally solved. The discovery of this tomb would be more significant than that of Tutankhamun. It would not only reveal unimaginable treasures, but it would give us the final chapter in the life of a woman whose story has been told almost exclusively by her enemies. The history of the victors is the one that is remembered, but the truth, sometimes, simply waits to be rediscovered. And somewhere, perhaps deep beneath the temple of Taposiris Magna, that truth is waiting still. To truly understand the mystery of Cleopatra's end, one must first dismantle the myth of her life. For 2 millennia, her story has been told not by her own people, but by her conquerors. The portrait that has survived is a Roman caricature, a masterpiece of political assassination, painted with the brushes of propaganda and sexism. It is a portrait of a femme fatale, an exotic enchantress whose primary weapons were her beauty and her bedchamber. She is the serpent of the Nile, who brought down not one, but two of Rome's greatest men, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, luring them to their doom with foreign charms and decadent luxury. This version of Cleopatra, immortalized by writers like Plutarch and Shakespeare, and later by the glittering fantasies of Hollywood, is an intoxicating and enduring legend. It is also almost entirely a fiction, a deliberate and masterful deception crafted to justify a war and legitimize an empire. To find the real Cleopatra, we must look past the Roman propaganda and venture into the world that forged her. We must step into the heart of her power, not her bedroom, but her mind. Cleopatra VII was not born into a world of simple luxury. She was born into the intellectual furnace of the ancient world, the city of Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great, Alexandria was the epicenter of knowledge, culture, and science. Its heart was the legendary Great Library, a repository of hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing the accumulated wisdom of Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond. This was the environment that shaped her. She grew up breathing an air thick with philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and literature. While other royals may have indulged in simple pleasures, Cleopatra indulged in knowledge. She was a product of the library, a scholar queen in the truest sense. Her intellect was not merely a passive hobby, it was her most formidable political tool. The most telling evidence of this is her mastery of language. The Ptolemaic dynasty, from which she descended, was of Macedonian Greek origin. For 300 years, her ancestors had ruled Egypt as foreigners, speaking only Greek and refusing to adopt the customs of the people they governed. Cleopatra was the first and the only member of her royal house to break this tradition. She took the time and made the considerable effort to learn the ancient Egyptian language. This was a revolutionary act. It was a profound statement of respect and a brilliant political maneuver that instantly endeared her to the millions of native Egyptians who had long viewed their rulers as aloof overlords. It allowed her to communicate directly with her subjects, to hear their pleas, and to preside over religious ceremonies, not as a Greek queen, but as a true Egyptian pharaoh. But her linguistic talents did not stop there. The ancient historian Plutarch, whose writings are one of our primary sources, notes that she rarely required an interpreter. He claims she could converse fluently with Ethiopians, Troglodytes, Hebrews, Arabians, Syrians, Medes, and Parthians, among others. This ability to speak at least 9 languages gave her an almost unprecedented advantage in diplomacy. She could negotiate directly, understand the nuances of different cultures, and build personal rapport with foreign emissaries in a way no other ruler of her time could. This was not the talent of a seductress. It was the skill of a brilliant and dedicated statesman. Her intellectual pursuits extended far beyond languages. While many of the texts she may have authored are lost to history, her reputation as a scholar echoed for centuries after her death. Medieval Arabic texts, written long after the fall of Rome and free from its political biases, describe her in a completely different light. They speak of her not as a temptress, but as a philosopher and a scientist. These sources claim she wrote learned books on subjects ranging from chemistry and medicine to mathematics and philosophy. Whether she personally penned these volumes or was simply the royal patron of the scientific work they contained, the reputation itself is significant. It reveals that for a vast portion of the world, for many centuries, Cleopatra was remembered first and foremost for her powerful mind. She was seen as an intellectual heavyweight, a peer of the great thinkers of her age, a woman who ruled not just a kingdom of sand and river, but a kingdom of ideas. This is the foundation upon which the real Cleopatra was built, a formidable intellect forged in the greatest center of learning on earth. It was this mind, not her beauty, that she deployed in the high-stakes game of political survival that defined her reign. From the very beginning, her position was precarious. She ascended to the throne as a teenager, forced into a co-regency with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. In the treacherous court of Alexandria, this was not a partnership, but a death sentence waiting to happen. The court eunuchs and advisors, seeing her brother as a more pliable puppet, quickly moved against her, forcing her into exile in Syria. A lesser ruler would have faded into obscurity. But Cleopatra was not a lesser ruler. She raised a mercenary army and returned to Egypt, ready to fight a civil war for her birthright. It was at this critical juncture that the great Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, pursuing his rival Pompey. Cleopatra immediately recognized the situation for what it was, not a threat, but an unparalleled opportunity. Her brother's forces controlled the harbor, preventing her from meeting Caesar openly. Trapped and outmaneuvered, she conceived of one of the most audacious plans in political history. According to the legend, she had herself wrapped tightly in a carpet or a linen sack and was carried by a servant through the enemy lines, delivered directly into Caesar's private chambers as a piece of cargo. Let us pause to consider the sheer audacity of this act. This was not a romantic gesture. This was a desperate, high-risk gambit. She placed her life and her entire future into the hands of her enemies and a foreign general, armed with nothing but her own courage and force of personality. When she was unfurled from the carpet before Caesar, he was not just met with a beautiful young woman, he was confronted by a political genius, a queen who refused to be denied. He was impressed by her daring, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination to claim her throne. The alliance they formed that night, and the love affair that followed, was born not of simple seduction, but of a meeting of two powerful minds who recognized in each other a shared ambition and a will to power. Caesar, the master strategist of Rome, had met his match in the young queen of Egypt. He backed her claim, defeated her brother's forces, and secured her position as the sole ruler of Egypt. She, in turn, gave him a loyal and incredibly wealthy ally, and a son, Caesarion, who would forever link their legacies. Years later, after Caesar's assassination and the subsequent fracturing of Roman power, Cleopatra found herself in a similar position. Rome was now divided, with its eastern territories under the control of another powerful general, Mark Antony. Antony summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus to answer questions about her loyalty. Once again, Cleopatra understood that the nature of this first meeting would determine the future of her kingdom. She did not arrive as a supplicant, a humbled client queen coming to beg for favor. She arrived as a goddess. Her entrance into Tarsus is one of the most spectacular displays of soft power ever recorded. She sailed up the river Cydnus on a magnificent golden barge with purple sails and silver oars. She herself was dressed in the robes of the goddess Aphrodite, reclining under a gilded canopy, while her servants, dressed as cupids and sea nymphs, fanned her and burned sweet incense. The entire city, including Antony himself, was left breathless by the spectacle. This was not mere vanity. It was a calculated masterpiece of psychological and political theatre. Cleopatra knew that Antony revered Greek mythology and that he styled himself as the living embodiment of the god Dionysus, the Greek counterpart to the Roman Bacchus. By arriving as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, she was not just presenting herself as a beautiful woman, she was speaking to him in a language of myth and divinity that he understood intimately. She was creating a narrative in which their meeting was not a political summons, but a fated, divine encounter between a god and a goddess. She disarmed him before a single word of negotiation was spoken. The alliance that followed, which would see them become lovers, parents to 3 children, and the joint rulers of a vast Eastern empire, was forged in this crucible of spectacle and symbolism. For Cleopatra, this partnership was the culmination of her life's ambition, to restore Egypt to its former glory and to create a dynasty that could stand as an equal to Rome. It was a strategic alliance aimed at securing Egypt's independence and prosperity for generations to come. Her methods were unconventional, theatrical, and brilliant, but they were always in service of a clear political goal. Central to her success was her deep and genuine connection with the country she ruled. Unlike her Greek ancestors, she did not see herself as a foreigner ruling over a conquered people. She embraced the identity of an Egyptian pharaoh with a passion and sincerity that won her the fierce loyalty of her subjects. Her decision to learn their language was just the beginning. She immersed herself in their religion and traditions, participating in ancient festivals and presenting herself to the public as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. This was more than just political theatre. It was a reflection of a ruler who understood that true power comes not from force, but from a shared identity and a mutual respect between the leader and the led. Under her rule, Egypt became a prosperous and stable nation. She reformed the economy, managed the country's vast agricultural wealth with skill, and pulled the kingdom out of a crisis that had been brewing under her father's reign. She was a competent and effective administrator, a hands-on ruler who strengthened Egypt's status as a world power. It was this success, this image of a strong, independent, and beloved queen, that made her so terrifyingly dangerous to Octavian in Rome. She was not a weak, decadent puppet ruler that Rome could easily control. She was a sovereign power in her own right, with the wealth, intellect, and popular support to challenge Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean. It was precisely because she was so formidable that Octavian launched one of the most vicious and successful propaganda campaigns in history against her. Unable to attack her on the grounds of being an incompetent ruler, he attacked her character. He waged a war of words, a smear campaign designed to demonize her in the eyes of the Roman people. His propagandists worked tirelessly to craft the image that has haunted her ever since. She was portrayed as a foreign sorceress who used black magic and potions to ensnare good Roman men. She was depicted as a depraved and insatiable seductress, a symbol of everything that was corrupt and decadent about the East. He accused Mark Antony of having abandoned his Roman virtues, of having gone native under her spell, succumbing to a life of drunken debauchery and servitude to a foreign queen. This campaign was brutally effective. It transformed a complex geopolitical conflict into a simple morality play: the virtuous, disciplined West versus the corrupt, effeminate East. The Roman Senate, whipped into a frenzy by Octavian's rhetoric, was persuaded to declare Cleopatra an official enemy of the state. In a masterful political stroke, they declared war not on Mark Antony, which would have been another bloody Roman civil war, but directly on the Queen of Egypt. The war that followed was thus framed as a righteous defense of Roman values against a foreign threat. This Roman caricature, born of political necessity and fear, proved to be more enduring than any stone monument. It outlived her kingdom, outlived the Roman Empire itself, and has echoed down through the centuries. It has obscured the truth of the real woman, the brilliant scholar, the masterful diplomat, the skilled administrator, and the patriotic queen who fought to the very end to protect her people and her legacy. The portrait of Cleopatra as a mere seductress is the final, and perhaps most successful, victory of her greatest enemy. To find her, we must be willing to wipe away the layers of ancient slander and see the true masterpiece that lies beneath. To stand as the ruler of Egypt was to stand in a constant, silent dialogue with eternity. For Cleopatra, this was not a metaphor, it was a daily reality. The world she inherited was not a new kingdom to be forged, but an ancient legacy to be guarded, a story written in stone and sand that stretched back into the mists of time, far beyond the memory of even her own Greek ancestors. To understand the weight upon her shoulders, we must try to see this world through her eyes. We must imagine her, perhaps on a royal barge gliding down the lifeblood of her kingdom, the River Nile, leaving the bustling modern metropolis of Alexandria behind. As the flat, fertile plains give way to the rising western desert, they would appear. At first, they are just geometric shapes on the horizon, shimmering in the heat haze, but as the barge draws closer, their true, impossible scale asserts itself, dominating the landscape and the sky. The Great Pyramids of the Giza Plateau. For us, separated from Cleopatra by 2 millennia, she is a figure of antiquity. But for her, these monuments were an antiquity of an entirely different order. The Great Pyramid of Khufu had already stood on that plateau for nearly 2,500 years before she was even born. The time that separated Cleopatra from the builders of the pyramids was greater than the time that separates us from Cleopatra. They were as ancient to her as the Roman Colosseum is to us today, and then some. They were not just history, they were the embodiment of deep time, monuments built by men who were themselves legends, pharaohs of the Old Kingdom who were spoken of more as gods than as mortal rulers. As a scholar, her mind, trained in the vast halls of the Great Library, would have reeled with questions that even the accumulated knowledge of her time could not fully answer. The scrolls in Alexandria could tell her the names of the kings for whom they were built. Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. They contained the stories of the gods and the rituals of the afterlife. But could they truly explain how? How did these ancestors, without the iron tools and advanced machinery of her own age, quarry, transport, and lift millions of multi-ton blocks of stone with such breathtaking precision? The secrets of their construction, even to the last pharaoh of Egypt, were likely already shrouded in myth and priestly legend. She would have heard the stories passed down through generations, of great ramps, of immense armies of workers, perhaps even whispers of lost arts or divine intervention. To look upon the pyramids was to be humbled, to realize that even for the Queen of Egypt, some of the greatest secrets of her own land were locked away in the silent heart of the stone. But her questions would have gone deeper than mere engineering. She would have sought to understand their purpose, not just as tombs, but as statements of power and cosmology. As she gazed upon the Great Pyramid of Khufu, she would have seen more than a resting place. She would have seen a mountain of order rising from the chaos of the desert. The entire structure was a testament to the fundamental principle of Egyptian civilization, the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at was the divine principle of truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. It was the duty of every pharaoh to uphold Ma'at on earth, to keep the forces of chaos at bay and ensure the stability and prosperity of the kingdom. The Great Pyramid was Ma'at made manifest. Its 4 sides were aligned with an almost perfect accuracy to the 4 cardinal directions, a feat of surveying that was astonishing even by the standards of her own time. This was not for decoration. It was to anchor the very structure of the kingdom to the structure of the cosmos. The pyramid was a compass, a fixed point in a turning world, eternally binding Egypt to the movements of the heavens. She, a student of astronomy, would have known the sacred significance of the stars. And as queen, she would have been privy to the deeper knowledge held by the priests of Heliopolis, the ancient center of sun worship. She may have known, as some today theorize, that the layout of the 3 Giza pyramids was no accident. She may have understood that they formed a perfect terrestrial map of the 3 stars in the belt of the constellation Orion, a constellation the Egyptians identified with the great god Osiris, lord of the underworld and resurrection. Imagine the power of that knowledge, to believe that your earliest ancestors had not just built tombs, but had mirrored the heavens on earth, creating an eternal link between the kingdom of Egypt and the celestial kingdom of the gods. For them, the pharaoh did not simply die. He ascended to the stars to join Osiris in his journey across the night sky. The pyramids were the launch pads for this cosmic journey. They were machines of resurrection, built to ensure the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth that sustained both the pharaoh and the land of Egypt itself. For Cleopatra, fighting to preserve her kingdom from being swallowed by the burgeoning Roman Empire, this symbolism would have been profoundly resonant. The pyramids were a declaration in stone that Egypt was not a mere mortal kingdom, it was an eternal, divinely ordained civilization, anchored to the stars themselves. They were a source of immense pride and a reminder of the divine legacy she was sworn to protect. But if the Great Pyramid was a symbol of perfect, calculated order, the other great monument on that plateau was its opposite. It was a symbol of deep, primordial enigma, the Great Sphinx. As her gaze shifted from the clean, geometric lines of the pyramid to the weathered, organic form of the beast, the nature of her questions would have changed. The Sphinx did not speak of order and mathematics. It spoke of secrets and immense, unknowable age. Officially, in her time as in ours, the Sphinx was attributed to the pharaoh Khafre, the builder of the second pyramid, its human face believed to be his own royal portrait. It was the guardian of the necropolis, the eternal watchdog of the city of the dead. Yet, even in Cleopatra's time, there would have been whispers, priestly heresies that hinted at a different story. The priests, the keepers of ancient law, were the living libraries of Egypt. Their oral traditions stretched back into the undocumented past. They would have told her stories of the Zep Tepi, the first time, a mythical golden age when the gods themselves walked the earth and ruled over Egypt. These were the tales of Osiris, Isis, and Horus, the foundational myths of her culture. And in these stories, there were hints that the great monuments were not all built by mortal men. Some, the legends whispered, were legacies from that very first time. She may have heard the priests speak of the strange way the water had carved the stone. They would have pointed to the deep, vertical fissures running down the body of the Sphinx and the walls of its enclosure. These were not the marks of wind and sand, which create horizontal, layered patterns of erosion. They were the marks of centuries of heavy rainfall, something utterly alien to the hyper-arid climate of the Giza Plateau that had existed for thousands of years. This observation, which forms the basis of the modern water erosion hypothesis, may have been an ancient piece of priestly knowledge. The Sphinx, the priests might have whispered to their queen, was not built by Khafre. It was merely found by him, already ancient, already weathered by the rains of a forgotten, earlier age. It was a relic from the time of the gods, a creature of the first time that had witnessed the very birth of their civilization. What would a mind like Cleopatra's have made of such a story? She, the pragmatist, the political strategist, would have understood its power as a myth to reinforce the divine origins of her kingdom. But she, the scholar, would have been captivated by the geological possibility. She would have looked at the Sphinx not as a 2,500-year-old monument, but as a potential 10,000-year-old enigma. Its gaze, directed eternally eastward toward the rising sun, would no longer seem to be guarding Khafre's pyramid. Instead, it would be watching for the dawn of a new age, a silent observer that had seen civilizations rise and fall, a creature that knew secrets so old that even the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom were but children in its eyes. The Sphinx was the ultimate riddle, a question mark carved from living rock. What has it seen? What secrets does it guard in the bedrock beneath its paws? The legend of a hidden chamber, a hall of records, may have been a story she knew well, a tale of a library far older and more profound than even her own in Alexandria. This was the world Cleopatra inherited, a land of impossible, ordered mountains of stone and enigmatic, time-worn beasts, a kingdom where science and myth, history and magic were inextricably intertwined. Her dialogue with these monuments was a dialogue with her own destiny. They were a constant, humbling reminder of the scale of the legacy she carried. Khufu and Khafre had built for eternity, creating a physical immortality that had defied the ages. Her own battle for immortality was being fought on a different front. She could not hope to build on such a scale. The age of pyramid building was long past. Her fight was for the survival of the culture itself, the preservation of its knowledge, its religion, and its independence. Her mausoleum, which she planned to share with Mark Antony, was to be her own final statement, her own contribution to the architectural legacy of her kingdom. But she knew that her true legacy would not be written in stone, but in the survival of Egypt as a sovereign power. The pyramids represented an Egypt of immense strength, confidence, and stability, an Egypt that stood alone and answered to no one. They were a silent rebuke to the new world order that was dawning, the world of the all-consuming Roman eagle. As she stood before them, she must have felt an immense connection to those ancient kings. They were her ancestors, not by blood, but by office. They had faced their own struggles to uphold Ma'at and preserve their kingdom. Now, the mantle had fallen to her. She was the final link in this golden chain that stretched back 3,000 years. The weight of all those centuries, of every pharaoh who had come before her, was upon her shoulders. The pyramids were not just a wonder of the world to be admired. They were her inheritance, her inspiration, and her immense sacred burden. They were the eternal soul of the Egypt she was willing to die for. To rule Egypt was to be perpetually in conversation with the dead. The kingdom Cleopatra governed was a palimpsest, a manuscript on which 3,000 years of history had been written, erased, and rewritten. For a mind as astute as hers, the royal archives and the temple libraries were not dusty repositories of facts. They were living manuals of power, filled with blueprints for success and stark warnings of failure. To understand her own place in the long, golden chain of pharaohs, she would have studied the lives of her predecessors with the intensity of a general studying a battlefield. She would have sought to learn from their triumphs, but more importantly, from their ghosts, from the tragic figures whose reigns ended in chaos and whose legacies were almost lost to the sands of time. Of all the ghosts in the royal house, none would have offered a more complex or cautionary tale than those of the Amarna period, a dramatic and heretical chapter that had unfolded more than 13 centuries before her time. The story would not begin with the famous boy king, but with his father, a figure who represented the ultimate warning for any ruler of Egypt. Akhenaten, the heretic king. The scrolls would have told her a story that must have seemed both terrifying and strangely familiar in its ambition. Akhenaten, born Amenhotep IV, had done the unthinkable. In a land defined by its rich and ancient pantheon of gods of Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, and 1,000 others, he had declared them all to be false. He launched a religious revolution the likes of which the world had never seen, erasing the old gods and commanding that his people worship only a single, universal deity, the Aten, represented as the physical disk of the Sunday. This was not a subtle theological shift. It was a cataclysm. He closed the ancient and powerful temples of Amun-Ra in Thebes, the religious capital of the empire, for centuries. He disbanded its fabulously wealthy priesthood, seizing their assets and shattering their immense political power. He abandoned Thebes entirely and built a new, gleaming capital city in the middle of the desert, a place called Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. He even changed his own name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. He and his beautiful queen, Nefertiti, became the sole intermediaries between humanity and this new god. It was a radical act of absolute power, an attempt to remake Egyptian society from its very foundations. For Cleopatra, a ruler who understood the delicate balance of power between the throne and the temple, Akhenaten's story would have been a chilling lesson. He had shown what happened when a pharaoh declared war on the established order. His revolution, while perhaps born of genuine spiritual conviction, had been a political disaster. By attacking the priesthood of Amun-Ra, he had alienated one of the most powerful and influential factions in the kingdom. By moving the capital, he had dislocated the entire administrative and economic heart of the empire. The art from his reign, with its strangely elongated and androgynous figures, suggests a break not just with religious tradition, but with the very concept of order, of Ma'at, that had defined Egyptian culture for millennia. While he focused on his new religion, the Egyptian empire abroad began to crumble, its vassals neglected and its borders threatened. Akhenaten's reign was a case study in how a ruler's singular obsession could bring a global superpower to the brink of collapse. It was a lesson in the danger of ideological purity when pitted against the messy realities of politics and tradition. Cleopatra, in her own careful and public embrace of the cult of Isis and the ancient Egyptian pantheon, showed that she had learned this lesson well. She understood that to rule Egypt, one had to rule with its gods, not against them. Out of the ashes of this failed revolution stepped a boy, a child whose original name, Tutankhaten, paid homage to his father's god, but who would be remembered by the name he adopted as pharaoh, Tutankhamun. The scrolls would have portrayed him not as the icon of golden treasures we know today, but as the great restorer, the boy king, whose reign was dedicated to healing the spiritual wounds his father had inflicted upon the land. His very name change was a monumental political declaration. By replacing Aten with Amun, he signaled to the entire kingdom that the heresy was over. The old gods were back. His reign was a systematic undoing of his father's work. One of his first acts was to issue a decree, the Restoration Stele, which described the land as being in ruin, with the temples overgrown and the gods having turned their backs on Egypt. The text details his great project: to reopen the temples, to remake the statues of the gods, to reinstate the priesthoods, and to pour the wealth of the palace back into the religious institutions his father had bankrupted. He officially abandoned the desert city of Akhetaten, leaving it to crumble back into the sand, and moved the royal court back to the traditional centers of power at Memphis and Thebes. For the people of Egypt, and especially for the powerful priests of Amun-Ra, his reign was a return to normalcy, a restoration of Ma'at after an age of chaos. He was the king who put the universe back in its proper order. This story would have provided Cleopatra with a powerful blueprint for successful rule. Tutankhamun's reign demonstrated that a ruler's legitimacy was intrinsically linked to their role as a guardian of tradition. Power in Egypt was not just about armies and wealth. It was about maintaining the divine covenant between the gods and the land. By restoring the old religion, Tutankhamun had restored the very soul of the kingdom, securing his own place as a righteous and beloved pharaoh. Cleopatra's own elaborate public ceremonies, her identification with Isis, and her respect for the ancient priesthoods were a direct continuation of this pharaonic ideal. She, like the boy king centuries before her, understood that to be accepted as a true pharaoh, a Greek queen had to become the chief protector of Egyptian faith. But the story of Tutankhamun held a darker, more personal lesson, one that would have resonated deeply with Cleopatra's own precarious situation. The Great Restoration was cut short. Tutankhamun died suddenly, when he was only around 19 years old. He died before his own grand royal tomb could be completed. The result was that he was buried in a small, hastily adapted tomb in the Valley of the Kings, possibly one intended for a non-royal courtier. This seemingly minor historical footnote had a profound consequence. Because the tomb was small and insignificant, its location was quickly forgotten. It was eventually buried under the debris from the construction of a later, larger tomb, which protected it from the generations of tomb robbers who would plunder nearly every other pharaoh's grave. For Cleopatra, the lesson here was not about the preservation of treasure, but about the fragility of life and the unpredictability of fate. A pharaoh could plan meticulously for their journey into the afterlife, commissioning a grand house of eternity filled with all the provisions for 1,000,000 years. But an untimely death could undo all of it, leaving their eternal fate in the hands of their successors. And what came next in Tutankhamun's story would have been the most chilling warning of all. The pharaohs who eventually came to power after his short reign, particularly Horemheb, were military men who wanted to stabilize Egypt and erase the shame of the Amarna period completely. They initiated a systematic campaign of damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory. They set about destroying every trace of the heretic king, Akhenaten. They tore down his temples, smashed his statues, and chiseled his name from every monument they could find. But they did not stop with Akhenaten. In their zeal to erase the heresy, they also erased his successors, including the boy king who had restored the old ways, Tutankhamun. His name was struck from the official king lists. His monuments were usurped by later rulers who carved their own names over his. For the next 3,000 years, until the astonishing discovery of his tomb in 1922, Tutankhamun was a forgotten king, a ghost of history, his role as the great restorer completely unknown. This would have been a terrifying revelation for Cleopatra. It was irrefutable proof that a pharaoh's legacy, no matter how significant, was not guaranteed. It could be deliberately and systematically destroyed by those who followed. History, she would have realized, is not a fixed record. It is a narrative, and it is always written by the victors. The physical preservation of one's body in a tomb was only half the battle for immortality. The other half was the preservation of one's name and memory in the world of the living. If your name was forgotten, your soul, according to Egyptian belief, was in peril in the afterlife. This profound lesson would have shaped every major decision of Cleopatra's later reign. Her desperate, all-consuming struggle against Octavian was not just a fight for political power, it was a fight for her very existence in eternity. She knew what would happen if she lost. She knew that Octavian, a master of propaganda, would do to her exactly what Horemheb had done to Akhenaten and Tutankhamun. He would erase her. He would rewrite the history of her reign, transforming the scholar queen into a foreign temptress, the patriot into a decadent enemy. He would destroy her statues and strike her name from the records. He would ensure that future generations remembered her only as a villain in his own heroic story. Her alliance with Mark Antony and her determination to place her sons, Caesarion and her children with Antony, in positions of power was her strategy to prevent this. A strong dynasty was the only insurance policy against erasure. A powerful heir was the only one who could be trusted to protect her tomb, to perform the sacred rites that would sustain her soul, and to guard her memory against the slanders of her enemies. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb revealed to the modern world the incredible wealth of a pharaoh's burial. But to Cleopatra, the story of Tutankhamun, the story of his near erasure from history, would have been the far greater treasure. It was a warning, a lesson, and a motivation. It was the ghost of a boy king whispering across the centuries, reminding the last queen of Egypt that the battle for immortality is fought not just in the tomb, but in the memory of the world. To grasp the true magnitude of Cleopatra's reign is to understand not only the kingdom she ruled, but the universe of ideas she commanded. Her throne was not merely in a palace of gold and marble, it was situated at the very heart of the human mind, in the city of Alexandria, and the heart of Alexandria was its great library. We must not think of this place as a simple collection of books. The library, and its sister institution, the Mausoleum, were something far more potent. They were the world's first international research university, a state-funded engine of discovery that drew the greatest thinkers from across the known world. It was a city of thought, a crucible where Greek logic was fused with Egyptian mysticism, where Babylonian astronomy met Jewish theology, and where the boundaries of human knowledge were pushed further and faster than at any other time in history until the Renaissance. For 3 centuries before Cleopatra's birth, the Ptolemaic kings, her ancestors, had pursued a policy of intellectual acquisition with the fervor of conquering generals. They sent agents across the globe to buy or copy every scroll ever written. Ships docking in Alexandria's harbour were required to surrender any books on board to be copied by the library's scribes, with the copies returned to the owners and the originals added to the collection. At its zenith, the library was said to hold over 700,000 papyrus scrolls, a repository of knowledge so vast that it represented the collective memory of humanity. This was the world Cleopatra inherited. She was not just its queen, she was its final great patron, the inheritor and guardian of this immense treasury of thought. The central tragedy of her story, and ours, is that this treasury was ultimately lost. To contemplate the Library of Alexandria is to be haunted by the greatest of all historical questions. What did they know? And what did we lose when the flames consumed it all? To begin to answer this, we must sift through the conceptual ashes, searching for the ghosts of the knowledge that once resided there. We know, from the fragments of work that survived, that the scholars of Alexandria had achieved a level of scientific understanding that is nothing short of breathtaking. Consider Eratosthenes, the head librarian in the 3rd century before the Common Era, using nothing more than a well, a tower, and the principles of geometry, he calculated the circumference of the Earth. His result was so accurate that it was off by less than 2% of the modern accepted value. This was not a lucky guess. It was the result of brilliant scientific reasoning, precise measurement, and a conceptual grasp of our planet as a sphere, a fact that would be largely forgotten and fiercely debated for the next 1700 years. Or consider Aristarchus of Samos, an astronomer who lived around the same time. While the rest of the world believed the Earth was the center of the universe, Aristarchus, based on his meticulous observations and mathematical models, proposed a radical alternative, a heliocentric model, with the Earth and the other planets revolving around the Sunday. He put forth this revolutionary idea more than 17 centuries before Copernicus would be celebrated for the very same theory. His work, for the most part, was lost, his ideas dismissed and forgotten in the ages that followed. It is a ghost of a scientific revolution that might have been, a hint that our own understanding of the cosmos is not a linear progression, but a rediscovery of truths the ancients had already grasped. But the scholars of the library were not just theorists. They were builders, engineers, and inventors. The most spectacular example is Hero of Alexandria, often called Heron, who lived and worked in the 1st century of the Common Era, in the intellectual environment that Cleopatra's patronage had sustained. Hero was a genius of mechanical engineering. His surviving writings are a catalogue of inventions, so advanced they feel anachronistic. He designed and built the world's first steam engine, a device called the Aeolipile, a sphere that spun rapidly when heated, powered by jets of steam. While he considered it a novelty, it was a working proof of concept for converting thermal energy into motion, the foundational principle of our entire industrial age. He also created automated temple doors that would magically open when a fire was lit on the altar, powered by a hidden system of weights, pulleys, and pneumatic pressure. He designed the first vending machine, which dispensed holy water when a coin was inserted. He wrote theoretical treatises on automata, conceiving of programmable robots that could follow a set course, a primitive form of computer programming. The work of men like Hero proves that the world of Cleopatra was not a primitive age of superstition. It was a world on the cusp of a technological revolution. They understood complex mathematics, advanced mechanics, pneumatics, and the basic principles of steam power. They were not just thinking, they were making. This is the crucial context we must hold in our minds as we now turn from the known ghosts in the scrolls to the unknown ghosts in the sand, the physical artifacts from Cleopatra's world that seem to defy all conventional explanation. If the scholars of Alexandria were capable of such genius, what other secrets might they have unlocked? The clues are scattered, enigmatic, and fiercely debated. Let us travel south from Alexandria, up the Nile to the magnificent Temple of Hathor at Dendera. The temple as it stands today was largely completed during the late Ptolemaic and Roman periods, the very era of Cleopatra's reign. Deep within its crypt, carved into a stone wall, is one of the most baffling images in all of Egyptian art. It is known today as the Dendera Light. The relief depicts several figures holding what can only be described as a giant, transparent, bulb-like object. Inside this bulb, a long, wavy serpent extends from a lotus flower at the base. This lotus flower base is connected by what looks like a cable or stem to a rectangular box, which is identifiable as a jade pillar, an ancient Egyptian symbol of stability and power. The entire scene is eerily reminiscent of a modern, large-scale electrical device, such as a Crookes tube or a gas discharge lamp. The conventional Egyptological explanation is that the image is purely mythological. It is a symbolic representation of the birth of the snake god Harsomptus from a primeval lotus flower, a scene consistent with Egyptian creation myths. The serpent represents the creative force, the lotus is the symbol of birth, and the jade pillar is the backbone of Osiris, providing divine stability. This interpretation is logical within the framework of Egyptian religious symbolism. But what if we look at this not as a myth, but as a blueprint? What if the priests of Dendera were using the language of mythology to describe a piece of sacred technology? Let us return to Alexandria. The scholars there were certainly aware of static electricity. The Greek philosopher Thales of Miletus had discovered it 6 centuries earlier by rubbing amber. Is it so implausible that in the centuries that followed, the brilliant minds at the Mausoleum, with their state-funded mandate to experiment, might have investigated this phenomenon further? We know from other artifacts, like the so-called Baghdad Battery, that cultures in the ancient world may have had a working knowledge of galvanic cells, capable of producing a low-voltage electrical current. Could the scholars of Cleopatra's age have developed a way to harness and use this power? Could the Dendera light be a depiction of a real device, a religious artifact used by the high priests to create awe-inspiring light in the sacred windowless chambers of the temple? The theory is speculative, but it is not without a certain compelling logic. It provides a functional explanation for an image that is, symbolically, unlike almost any other in Egypt. It suggests that the knowledge held within the Library of Alexandria may have extended into the realm of practical electrical science. Let us consider another ghost. This one is a small, unassuming object, found in a tomb at Saqqara in 1898. It is a model of a bird, carved from sycamore wood. For decades, it sat in a box in the Cairo Museum, catalogued as a child's toy. But in the 1970s, it was re-examined and found to have several highly unusual features. Unlike other Egyptian bird carvings, its wings are shaped not like those of a bird in flight, but like the aerofoil of a modern aircraft, designed to generate lift. Its tail is not a fan of feathers, but a vertical stabilizer, like the rudder of a plane. When tested in a wind tunnel, modern replicas of the Saqqara bird have demonstrated surprising aerodynamic properties, proving to be effective gliders. The conventional explanation remains that it is a stylized representation of a falcon, or perhaps a ceremonial weather vane, but the alternative is tantalizing. We know from Hero of Alexandria that the engineers of this era were fascinated with mechanics and building models. Could the scholars of the library have studied the principles of aerodynamics? Could this small wooden object be a miniature prototype, a model glider from an ancient experiment in the science of flight? It seems incredible, yet it sits there in the museum, a physical object that seems to whisper of a knowledge of aerodynamics, 1,000 years ahead of its time. To understand how plausible these ideas might be, we must look to a Greek cousin of these Egyptian mysteries, the Antikythera mechanism. Discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of a Greek island, this device is, without exaggeration, the single most astonishing technological artifact ever recovered from the ancient world. It is a shoebox-sized device filled with an intricate system of over 30 interlocking bronze gears. For decades, its function was a complete mystery. But through modern X-ray and scanning technology, we have finally unlocked its secret. The Antikythera mechanism was a sophisticated analog computer. By turning a handle, its user could accurately predict the positions of the sun, moon, and visible planets, track the lunar calendar, and even predict solar and lunar eclipses for decades into the future. The sheer mechanical complexity of this device is staggering. The level of astronomical knowledge and precision engineering required to build it was not thought to have existed until the great cathedral clocks of 14th century Europe, some 1,500 years later. The Antikythera mechanism is undeniable proof that the scientific and engineering capabilities of the Hellenistic world, the world of Cleopatra, were far beyond what we have traditionally given them credit for. Now, place this fact back into the context of Alexandria. If Greek engineers could build such a complex astronomical computer, what could the scholars and engineers at the Mausoleum, with the patronage of the Ptolemies and the vast resources of the library at their disposal, have been capable of creating? The Antikythera mechanism makes the speculative theories about the Dendera light and the Saqqara bird seem far less fantastical. It provides a baseline of technological sophistication that opens up a universe of possibilities. This, then, is the true tragedy of the burning of the Great Library of Alexandria. The series of fires and destructions that befell it over several centuries, beginning, perhaps, with a fire during Julius Caesar's visit and culminating in its final obliteration, was not just a loss of ancient literature and history, it was a technological reset for humanity. We did not just lose the plays of Sophocles or the histories of Berossus. We may have lost the blueprints for steam engines. We may have lost the schematics for analog computers more complex than the Antikythera device. We may have lost treatises on the principles of flight and the science of electricity. Cleopatra, as the last great ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, was the final guardian of this world of wonders. Her death, and the subsequent absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, marked the beginning of the end for this incredible era of discovery. The intellectual center of the world shifted. The spirit of open-ended scientific inquiry began to wane, and the great library, no longer protected by royal patrons who valued knowledge above all else, was left to decline and ultimately perish. The so-called Dark Ages that would later descend upon Europe were perhaps far darker than we imagine, for they were a time spent in ignorance, slowly and painstakingly rediscovering knowledge that had already been mastered and perfected in the sun-drenched, brilliant city of Cleopatra's Alexandria. The ghosts of that lost knowledge still haunt us, whispering of a past that was far more advanced than we know, and a future that might have been. In the grand, sprawling narrative of Cleopatra's Egypt, the story of power and politics, of pyramids and philosophy, is all underpinned by a single, profound, and all-consuming obsession: the defeat of death. For the ancient Egyptians, mortality was not a final endpoint to be accepted, but a dangerous transitional phase to be meticulously managed, a perilous journey to be navigated with a combination of sacred science and divine magic. To understand the world that Cleopatra inherited, we must step away from the sunlit courts of the palace and enter the shadowed, silent world of the Pernefa, the house of beautification. This was not a place of mourning, but a workshop of eternity, a place that was equal parts temple, surgical theatre, and alchemical laboratory. Here, the final and most essential art of Egyptian civilization was practiced: the art of mummification. Let us approach this not as modern observers, but through the eyes of those who performed these sacred rites. Imagine the chief embalmer, a high-ranking priest who, during the procedure, would wear the carved mask of a jackal, invoking the spirit and authority of the god Anubis, the divine guardian who presided over the threshold between the living and the dead. For him, the body laid out on the alabaster slab was not merely a corpse. It was a vessel, the essential physical anchor to which the spiritual elements of the deceased, the ka, or life force, and the ba, the unique personality or soul, must one day return. If the body decayed, the soul would be left homeless, doomed to wander as a restless spirit, its chance at eternal life extinguished forever. The 70-day process that was about to unfold was therefore not a morbid preservation of the dead, but an act of profound hope, a sacred duty to construct an eternal, incorruptible body, a divine statue worthy of housing a god in the afterlife. The process began with a ritual purification. The body of the deceased noble, brought to the Pernefa, would first be washed with water, brought from the sacred Nile, the source of all life in Egypt. It was then cleansed with palm wine, its high alcohol content acting as a sterilizing agent, killing the bacteria on the skin. But for the Anubis priest, this was a symbolic rebirth, a baptism that washed away the impurities of mortal life and prepared the body for its divine transformation. It mirrored the very act of creation, when the first land emerged from the primeval, chaotic waters of Nun. Then, the sacred science began in earnest. With a ritual knife made of obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than any metal blade of the era, the priest would make a precise incision on the left side of the abdomen. This was the only major cut made to the body, and its placement was dictated by religious, not just anatomical, tradition. Through this opening, the embalmers would reach in and carefully remove the internal organs that were the primary source of decay: the stomach, the liver, the intestines, and the lungs. This was a practical, scientific step to prevent putrefaction, but it was also a critical ritual. The organs were not discarded. They were washed, dried with salt, and individually wrapped in linen, for they were believed to be needed by the deceased in the afterlife. Each organ was placed under the divine protection of one of the 4 sons of Horus, powerful deities who would guard them. The stomach was guarded by Duamutef, the intestines by Kebesinuef, the lungs by Hapi, and the liver by Imseti. These protected organs would be stored in 4 sacred vessels known as canopic jars, which would be placed in the tomb alongside the coffin. One organ, however, was treated with a unique and profound reverence: the heart. While all other major organs were removed, the heart was almost always left inside the body, or if accidentally removed, it was carefully placed back within the chest cavity, often with a protective amulet. For the Egyptians, the heart, or ib, was the most important part of a person. It was the seat of intelligence, emotion, memory, and conscience. The brain, in contrast, was considered to be entirely useless, little more than cranial stuffing, the source of mucus. This belief led to one of the most distinctive and, to modern sensibilities, gruesome steps of the process: the excerebration. To remove the brain without disfiguring the face, the embalmers employed a long bronze hook. This tool was carefully inserted through a nostril and pushed upwards, breaking through the thin ethmoid bone that separates the nasal cavity from the cranial cavity. The hook was then used to whisk and liquefy the brain tissue. Once the brain was reduced to a semi-liquid state, the body would be turned on its side, allowing the contents of the skull to drain out through the nose. The now empty cranial vault was then rinsed with palm wine and filled with linen or resin. To the Anubis priest, this was simply a matter of removing a useless, moisture-rich organ that would otherwise cause the head to decay. It was a practical solution rooted in a completely different understanding of human consciousness. With the body now empty of its most perishable contents, the most critical phase of preservation could begin: dehydration. The abdominal cavity was temporarily packed with linen and other materials to absorb any remaining moisture, and then the entire body was completely covered in a mountain of natron. Natron is a naturally occurring salt mixture, primarily composed of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, harvested from the dry lake beds of the Egyptian desert. It is a powerful desiccant. For 40 days, the body would lie buried in this salt bath. The natron would relentlessly draw out every last drop of moisture from the skin, muscles, and tissues, creating an arid, sterile environment where the bacteria of decay could not survive. This was the chemical secret to their success, a natural process of desiccation that left the body a dry, leathery, but perfectly preserved and recognizable husk. Spiritually, this 40-day period was deeply significant. It was believed to mirror the period of time when Sirius, the most important star in the Egyptian sky, disappeared from view each year before its heliacal rising, which heralded the life-giving inundation of the Nile. It was a period of unseen transition, a time of waiting in the darkness before the promise of rebirth. At the end of the 40 days, the body was exhumed from its salt bed. Now shrunken and gaunt, it was taken to be beautified. It was washed once more, and then the long, meticulous process of anointing and wrapping began. The skin was rubbed with a mixture of fragrant oils, beeswax, and resins, such as cedar oil and myrrh. This was not just a cosmetic act. These substances helped to make the desiccated skin more supple and provided an additional layer of antibacterial and waterproof protection. The body cavities were then permanently packed with linen, sawdust, or even peppercorns to restore a more rounded, lifelike shape. The cheeks were padded, and artificial eyes, often made of stone or painted onions, were placed in the sockets. The Anubis priest was no longer just an embalmer. He was a sacred artist, transforming the preserved body into a divine portrait statue, a perfect, idealized vessel for the soul's return. The final stage was the wrapping. This was a complex ritual that could take over 2 weeks to complete. Hundreds of yards of fine linen strips would be used, each limb, each finger, and each toe being wrapped individually. Between the layers of linen, the priests would place dozens of magical amulets, each with a specific protective purpose. A scarab beetle amulet would be placed over the heart, an ankh for life, a jade pillar for stability. As each amulet was placed, and each bandage was wrapped, priests would recite incantations and spells, imbuing the wrappings with divine, protective power. Finally, the fully wrapped mummy was placed within its nested series of coffins, each one lavishly decorated with images of gods and sacred texts. The physical work was complete. The vessel was ready for its eternal voyage. But the journey had only just begun. The preserved body was the anchor, but the soul, the bar, was the traveler. And its destination, the afterlife, or dua, was not a peaceful paradise, but a terrifying, treacherous underworld. It was a realm of fiery lakes, monstrous demons, and gates guarded by knife-wielding gods. To navigate this perilous landscape, the deceased needed a guide, a map, and a book of secret passwords. This was the purpose of the so-called Book of the Dead. This famous text was not a single, standardized book. It was a personalized collection of spells, hymns, and incantations, written on a papyrus scroll and placed in the tomb with the deceased. Its proper Egyptian name was the Book of Coming Forth by Day, which itself reveals its purpose: to provide the soul with the magical knowledge needed to overcome the dangers of the night, world of the duat, and emerge, reborn, into the light of eternal day. Each spell was a tool for a specific challenge. There were spells to give the deceased power over their own limbs, spells to allow them to breathe air and drink water, spells to ward off crocodiles and snakes, and spells to remember their own name, for to forget one's name was to cease to exist. The journey culminated in the ultimate trial, the final judgment in the Hall of Two Truths. This was the moment the entire process, both physical and spiritual, had been leading up to. The soul of the deceased would be led by the god Anubis, before a tribunal of 42 divine judges, and the great god Osiris, king of the underworld. Here, the deceased had to make the negative confession, declaring to each judge a sin they had not committed. I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not been deceitful. After this declaration of purity, the final, terrifying test would commence, the weighing of the heart. A great golden scale would be brought forth. In one pan, Anubis would place the heart of the deceased, the vessel of their conscience. In the other pan, he would place a single, pure white ostrich feather, the symbol of Ma'at, the divine principle of truth and order. The god Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe of the gods, stood ready with his palette to record the verdict. The entire pantheon watched in silence. If the deceased had lived a righteous life, their heart would be light and pure, balancing perfectly with the feather. Vindicated, they would be declared true of voice and led by Horus into the presence of Osiris to be granted eternal life in the field of reeds, a blissful, idyllic version of Egypt. But if the heart was heavy with the sins and misdeeds of a lifetime, it would outweigh the feather, the scale would tip, the verdict would be guilty, and in that moment, the heart would be thrown to the floor where a terrifying composite monster awaited. Her name was Amit, the devourer of the dead, a creature with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Amit would devour the sinful heart, and in that instant, the soul of the deceased would be utterly and permanently annihilated, a second death from which there was no return. This was the ultimate existential gamble that lay at the heart of Egyptian civilization. Mummification was the science of preparing the vessel. The Book of the Dead was the map for the journey, and the weighing of the heart was the final, terrifying exam, a test of a person's entire moral worth, with eternity hanging in the balance. The final brushstroke has been applied to the nested golden coffin, the last sacred amulet has been placed upon the linen wrappings, and the 70-day ritual of beautification is complete. The physical vessel for eternity is perfect. But now, the architect of the tomb, the master of the necropolis, faces his greatest and most enduring challenge. He must protect this divine body, and the immense wealth that accompanies it, not for a year, not for a century, but for 1,000,000 years. His enemy is not the chaos of the underworld, for which the priests have prepared the soul. His enemy is far more relentless, more ingenious, and more persistent. His enemy is human greed. To guard against this foe, the architect will not construct the elaborate, mechanically triggered death traps that would later ignite the fantasies of Hollywood. There will be no giant rolling boulders, no pressure plates that unleash poison darts, no sand-filled rooms that drain to suffocate the intruder. The ancient engineers were masters of stone and leverage, but the intricate clockwork mechanics required for such devices were beyond their scope. More importantly, they understood a deeper truth. Such traps can be disarmed, their mechanisms bypassed by a clever thief. The architect's defense, therefore, would be built not of mechanics, but of something far more potent: misdirection, psychology, and raw, overwhelming force. He was about to engage in a silent war of wits with generations of thieves yet unborn. His first line of defense was the most subtle, yet in some ways the most powerful. It was the power of the word, the weapon of the curse. We must not think of these curses as a modern horror movie trope. To the ancient Egyptian, both the priest who wrote them and the thief who read them, these were no idle threats. They were divine decrees, legally and spiritually binding contracts with the gods of the underworld. Carved in the hieroglyphs above the tomb's entrance or within the first passageway, the curse was the spiritual perimeter alarm. It was designed to prey upon the deepest fears of a profoundly superstitious people. The curses promised not a quick death, but an eternity of suffering. One common text from a tomb at Saqqara warns, "As for any man who will enter this tomb in his impurity, I shall seize his neck like a bird's. I shall cast the fear of myself into him." Another threatens that the gods will annihilate his heir, ensuring the end of Plind, his bloodline. The most terrifying threats were not aimed at the thief's mortal life, but at his eternal soul. They promised that the thief would be judged harshly by the gods, that his own soul would be devoured by Amit, and that he would be denied the afterlife he so deeply believed in. For a thief, who was likely hoping to use his stolen wealth to finance his own proper burial and ensure his own immortality, this was the ultimate deterrent. The curse forced him to weigh his earthly greed against his eternal salvation. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, a spiritual barrier designed to turn a robber's own faith against him. The so-called curse of King Tutankhamun, which created a media frenzy in the 1920s, was in many ways a modern echo of this ancient practice, a tale of terror that protected the tomb's sanctity from the prying eyes of the press, just as its ancient counterparts were meant to ward off the prying hands of looters. If the thief's greed was strong enough to overcome his fear of the gods, he would then face the architect's second line of defense, a labyrinth of architectural deception. The goal here was not to kill the intruder, but to confuse, exhaust, and demoralize him. As the thief ventured into the darkness, guided by the flickering light of a torch, he would encounter features designed to waste his time and break his spirit. He might find a series of beautifully carved false doors, perfect replicas of real entrances, complete with intricate inscriptions. These doors served a religious purpose, as a spiritual exit for the car of the deceased, but they also served as a brilliant trap for the living. The robber might spend days, even weeks, painstakingly trying to pry open or tunnel through a solid wall of rock, only to find nothing behind it. The very layout of the tomb was a weapon. The tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, for example, is a confusing maze of more than 10 chambers connected by long corridors and steep, descending stairways. An intruder without an intimate knowledge of the plan would quickly become disoriented, wandering through a series of empty, undecorated rooms, each one a dead end designed to sap his resolve. The architect was playing a game of attrition. He knew the thief was working in cramped, hot, airless conditions, with a limited supply of water and lamp oil. The labyrinth was designed to make the work so difficult and unrewarding that the thief would simply give up and retreat. Within this maze, however, the architect might place one of the few truly physical and lethal traps found in Egyptian tombs, the concealed pit. As a thief made his way down a long, sloping corridor, he might not notice that a section of the floor ahead was not solid bedrock, but a thin, plastered-over cover. A single misstep would send him plunging into a deep, vertical shaft, sometimes 20 or 30 feet deep. The fall alone could be fatal. Even if he survived, trapped at the bottom of a smooth-walled pit in total darkness with a broken leg, his fate was sealed. These pits were a simple, brutal, and effective form of security, a sudden and deadly surprise within the psychological maze. Should the determined thief navigate the maze and avoid the pits, he would finally come to the architect's third and final line of defense: brute, overwhelming force. The entrance to the actual burial chamber was almost always sealed not with a door, but with a series of immense stone plugs. After the funeral ceremony was complete and the sarcophagus was in place, massive blocks of solid granite or quartzite, weighing many tons each, would be released from a higher chamber and allowed to slide down a sloping passage, completely blocking the entrance. These were not intricate traps. They were the ancient equivalent of a bank vault door. There was no secret mechanism to bypass them. The only way through was to physically destroy them. This presented the thief with a monumental task. He would have to spend weeks, perhaps months, in the suffocating darkness, painstakingly chipping away at the granite plug with crude tools. The work was slow, exhausting, and incredibly loud, the sound of hammer on chisel echoing through the tomb complex and risking discovery by temple guards. This was the ultimate test of a robber's determination. The architect's final gambit was to make the prize so difficult to reach that the effort would outweigh the potential reward. The strategy of secrecy itself became the primary defense in the later New Kingdom. The Great Pyramids of the Old Kingdom were magnificent, but they were also giant, unmissable advertisements for the wealth they contained. They were all plundered in antiquity. In response, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, including Tutankhamun, chose to be buried in the Valley of the Kings, a remote, desolate canyon on the west bank of the Nile. Here, their tombs were not marked with grand superstructures, but were cut deep into the limestone cliffs, their entrances meticulously hidden and buried under tons of rock and debris. The entire valley became a sacred and heavily guarded royal necropolis. The location itself was the security system. And yet, despite the curses, the labyrinths, the pits, the plugs, and the secrecy, nearly every single tomb was eventually found and robbed, most of them in antiquity. How was this possible? The answer lies in the most significant weakness of any security system: the human element. The tomb robbers were rarely outsiders. They were often the very artisans and laborers who had built the tombs, or their direct descendants. They were the ones who knew the secret layout of the corridors, who had seen where the false walls were constructed, who knew the exact location of the hidden entrance before it was buried. The knowledge was a valuable and often corrupting inheritance. The eternal battle between the architect and the thief was frequently an inside job. While the Egyptians relied on this subtle blend of psychology and brute force, it is fascinating to note that other ancient cultures occasionally employed a more aggressive and directly lethal form of security. In the pre-Columbian Mayan city of Palenque, in modern-day Mexico, the tomb of a high-status woman known as the Red Queen was discovered in 1994. When archaeologists opened her sarcophagus, they found her body and all the precious jade artifacts accompanying her were completely covered in a thick layer of bright red powder. This powder was cinnabar, a mineral form of mercury sulfide. It is a highly toxic substance. In the enclosed, unventilated space of the burial chamber, a robber who broke open the sarcophagus would have inhaled a lethal dose of mercury dust, leading to a horrible and certain death. This was a true poison trap, a chemical booby trap of a sophistication the Egyptians never employed. It stands as a chilling reminder that while the Egyptian architect sought to outwit the mind of the thief, other cultures sometimes aimed simply and effectively to stop his heart. The hunt for history has entered a new age. For centuries, the story of Egypt has been a story of the shovel and the pickaxe, of painstaking excavation that, by its very nature, is an act of destruction. To uncover a tomb, one must break a seal. To study a mummy, one must unwrap its ancient linens. To understand a temple, one must clear the debris of ages that has both protected and obscured it. The pioneers of Egyptology, from Belzoni to Howard Carter, were men of their time. They sought history by taking it apart, sometimes with care, sometimes with dynamite. But today, the greatest breakthroughs are being made, not by breaking things down, but by seeing through them. We have entered an era of non-invasive archaeology, a time when our most powerful tools are not wielded by hand, but are guided by the fundamental laws of physics. We are no longer just digging in the sand. We are learning to ask the stones themselves to tell us their secrets. The dialogue between our most advanced technology and Egypt's most ancient structures is yielding answers to questions we once thought unanswerable. At the forefront of this revolution is a project that sounds like science fiction, using the power of the cosmos to peer into the heart of the Great Pyramid. The project, known as scan pyramids, employs a technique called muon tomography. The science is as elegant as it is powerful. Every second of every day, the Earth is showered by subatomic particles called muons. These particles are created when high-energy cosmic rays from deep space slam into the atoms of our upper atmosphere. They are natural, harmless, and incredibly penetrating. They rain down upon us, passing through our bodies, our buildings, and even through hundreds of feet of solid rock. The Scan Pyramids team harnessed this constant cosmic rain. By placing highly sensitive muon detectors in different locations, including inside the pyramid in the Queen's Chamber and in corridors outside the main structure, they could track the trajectory of billions of these particles as they passed through the pyramid. The principle is simple. Like a cosmic X-ray, if a muon passes through solid stone, it is more likely to be absorbed or deflected. If it passes through an empty space, it will continue on its path unimpeded. By measuring the number of muons arriving at the detectors from different angles, scientists can build a three-dimensional map of the pyramid's internal density. Areas with fewer muons are solid stone. Areas with a surprising surplus of muons must be empty space, a void. For years, the team collected data, patiently building their map of the pyramid's interior. And in 2017, they announced a discovery that stunned the world. Their data revealed a massive, previously unknown void, a secret chamber or corridor hidden deep within the pyramid structure. It is located directly above the magnificent Grand Gallery, the sloping corridor that leads to the king's chamber, and its scale is immense. This void is estimated to be at least 100 feet long, with a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery itself. It is the first major structural discovery inside the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. The existence of this void is now a matter of scientific fact, but its purpose remains a profound mystery. What is it? Is it a hidden construction corridor, an internal ramp used by the builders to haul stones to the upper levels of the pyramid, sealed off and forgotten after its purpose was served? Is it a structural feature, a cleverly designed empty space intended to relieve the immense weight of the masonry above the Grand Gallery, protecting its relatively thin ceiling from collapsing? Or is it something more? Could this be a true secret chamber, a hidden storeroom for sacred funerary texts, or even the real, untouched burial chamber of the pharaoh Khufu, a chamber that has remained sealed and secret while tomb robbers over the millennia were distracted by the more obvious king's chamber below? We do not yet have the answers. Muon tomography can tell us that the void is there, but it cannot tell us what is inside it. To find that out will require a new phase of exploration, perhaps drilling a small, pencil-sized hole and inserting a fiber-optic camera, a micro-exploration that respects the integrity of the monument. For now, the Great Void, as it has been nicknamed, remains a tantalizing ghost in the machine, a giant question mark revealed by modern physics, hanging silently in the heart of the ancient world's greatest wonder. It is a powerful reminder that even the most studied monument on Earth still holds its secrets close. This ability to see the invisible is not limited to peering inside a single structure. It is revolutionizing the very way archaeologists search for new sites. The search for Cleopatra's lost tomb at Taposiris Magna is a perfect example. Instead of relying on guesswork and digging thousands of exploratory trenches, Dr. Kathleen Martinez and her team can now map the unseen world beneath their feet. They use a technology called ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. A GPR device sends pulses of radio waves into the ground. These waves bounce off of subsurface objects in different ways. A wave hitting solid bedrock will return a different signal than one hitting a buried stone wall, a hollow chamber, or a different type of soil. By analyzing these returning echoes, a computer can generate a three-dimensional map of what lies hidden beneath the surface. This allows the team to trace the paths of underground tunnels, identify potential sealed-off chambers, and locate anomalies that might represent a hidden tomb entrance, all without disturbing a single grain of sand. Combined with technologies like LIDAR, which uses lasers fired from drones or aircraft to create incredibly detailed topographical maps of the surface, archaeologists can now peel back the layers of the landscape itself. LIDAR can reveal the faint outlines of ancient settlements, roads, and irrigation channels that are completely invisible to the naked eye. It allows archaeologists to work smarter, to focus their precious time and resources on the most promising locations. It is this technological toolkit that gives the modern hunt for history its unprecedented power, guiding the search for everything from lost cities to the final resting place of the last queen of Egypt. Perhaps the most personal and profound application of modern technology, however, is in how it is reacquainting us with the ancient Egyptians themselves. For centuries, they were known to us through their art, their texts, and their silent, linen-wrapped mummies. But now, science is giving them back their voices and their faces. Breakthroughs in the field of paleogenetics have made it possible to extract and sequence ancient DNA from the remains of mummies. This incredible tool is solving age-old mysteries of the royal bloodlines. For decades, the parentage of Tutankhamun was a matter of intense debate, but a 2010 DNA study of his mummy, along with several others from the Valley of the Kings, definitively identified his parents as the heretic king Akhenaten and a mummy known only as the Younger Lady, who was herself Akhenaten's sister. This same DNA analysis can also act as a diagnostic tool, allowing us to understand the health and diseases of the pharaohs. The study of Tutankhamun's mummy revealed that he was afflicted with several genetic conditions, including a bone disease that would have required him to walk with a cane, and, crucially, traces of the DNA of the parasite that causes malaria, the oldest known genetic proof of the disease. This tells us that this god king was, in the end, a vulnerable human being, battling chronic pain and serious illness. This medical insight is complemented by the astonishing work of forensic reconstruction. Using high-resolution computed tomography, or CT scans, scientists can create a perfect, three-dimensional digital model of a mummy's skull without ever unwrapping it. This digital model can then be used by forensic artists, the same experts who help police identify modern crime victims, to rebuild the face of the pharaoh, muscle by muscle, tissue by tissue. We can now look upon a scientifically accurate reconstruction of the face of Tutankhamun and see not a golden mask, but the face of a young man, a face that had been hidden from the world for over 3,000 years. Technology is, quite literally, resurrecting the people of ancient Egypt, transforming them from static figures in a history book into living, breathing individuals with families, frailties, and faces we can recognize. The new age of exploration is not just about discovering chambers of stone, it is about rediscovering the humanity that has been sealed away for millennia, proving that even the deepest secrets of the past cannot remain hidden forever from the relentless, curious gaze of the future. Our journey through the sands of time, for now, draws to a close. We have followed the ghost of a queen to the edge of the sea. We have stood in the shadow of stone mountains that seem to touch the stars, and we have peered into the silent, golden face of a boy king who ruled an empire. We have sifted through the ashes of a library that held the world's knowledge, and deciphered the sacred maps that promised a path through the terrors of the underworld. We have wielded the tools of modern physics to find voids in the heart of eternity, and have rebuilt the faces of the long dead. And yet, as we stand at the end of this long corridor of history, we must ask ourselves a final, humbling question. Are we truly any closer to the final truth? Or has every answer we have found only served to unlock a door to a room filled with a dozen new, more profound, and more unsettling questions? Perhaps this is the true, enduring magic of ancient Egypt. It is a civilization that resists simple conclusions. Its mysteries are not simple puzzles to be solved and filed away. They are living enigmas that seem to grow deeper and more complex the more we study them. The quest to find Cleopatra's tomb is not merely an archaeological pursuit. It has become a reflection of our own deep-seated desire to rescue truth from the grip of power, to give voice to those who have been silenced by the relentless march of history. We search for her, not just to find gold or a mummy, but to find a piece of our own story, to understand the eternal struggle between legacy and oblivion. The Great Pyramids themselves are more than just a marvel of ancient engineering. They are a monument to the most audacious and uniquely human of all ambitions, the refusal to be forgotten. In their perfect geometry and their celestial alignments, we see a reflection of our own species' innate, desperate search for meaning and order in a vast and chaotic universe. They stand as a testament to the idea that a human life, a human consciousness, is a thing of such value that it is worth marshalling the resources of an entire nation to preserve it against the endless erosion of time. When we gaze upon them, we are not just admiring the work of an ancient culture. We are confronting the grandest expression of our own fear of mortality and our unyielding hope for something more. The intricate rituals of mummification and the sacred spells of the Book of the Dead are not the morbid superstitions of a primitive people. They are the tangible result of a culture that took the question of what happens after we die more seriously than any other. The journey through the duat, the weighing of the heart against the feather of truth, these are not just myths. They are a profound and complex moral and spiritual framework, a reflection of our own universal anxieties about judgment, our own hopes for redemption, and our own terror at the thought of a final, irreversible end. The Egyptians dared to map the landscape of the soul's journey, And in their ancient maps, we continue to see the outlines of our own deepest questions. This, then, is the ultimate secret. The enduring power of ancient Egypt lies not in the answers it provides, but in the mirror it holds up to us. Our endless fascination with this civilization is, in the end, a fascination with ourselves. When we look into the serene golden eyes of Tutankhamun's mask, we are seeing a reflection of our own complex relationship with youth, power, and the profound tragedy of a life unfulfilled. When we stand before the silent, weathered gaze of the Great Sphinx, we are not just looking at a statue. We are confronting the physical embodiment of the ultimate riddle, the eternal question of who we are and from whence we came. The civilization of the Nile Valley holds this magnetic power because it was, above all, a civilization obsessed with the fundamental questions of human existence. It addressed life, death, time, and the cosmos not with quiet contemplation, but with an ambition, an artistry, and a monumental permanence that has never been equaled. The sands of Egypt will continue to shift, revealing new secrets to our children's children, while burying others for generations to come. Modern technology will continue to peel back the layers, revealing voids in stone and whispers in DNA, but the central mystery will remain. The puzzle of ancient Egypt is not a finite problem to be solved, but a perpetual journey to be undertaken. And the true treasure we unearth is not an artifact of gold or a lost papyrus scroll. It is the profound sense of wonder that this journey awakens within us. It is the humility we feel when confronted by the scale of their achievements and the depth of their thoughts. The questions they carved into their tombs are the very same questions we carve into our own hearts. And so, we will continue to watch, to wonder, and to listen for the echoes of eternity from across the millennia. For in the end, the search for their secrets is, and always will be, the search for our own. Good night and sweet dreams.